Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Digging into Ceramics. Today, I'm going to start off by using one of my favorite quotes from an 18th century novel by Lawrence Sterne. "But mark, madam, we live amongst riddles and mysteries. The most obvious things which come in our way have dark sides, which the quickest sight cannot penetrate into. And even the clearest and most exalted understandings amongst us find ourselves puzzled and at a loss in almost every cranny of nature's works. For those of us who study material culture, these words are at the very heart of what we do." In the process of unraveling one such mystery, we will reference the glowing glass houses of ancient Egypt and recall the buried cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. We then travel to the smoke-filled factories of 18th century Staffordshire, and finally to the serene landscape of South Carolina's Low Country, where all of these faraway times and places converged. We begin, though, with the rituals of 17th century East Asia, where tea and porcelain were united in acts of quiet contemplation. This 18th century teapot exemplifies the enduring power of Chinese mythology and how it shaped the imagination of Western artists. And indeed, the teapot is not Chinese, but was made in Staffordshire, England about 1770. Having an unglazed stoneware body, made in imitation of a Chinese original. Note that both teapots use two colors of clay to create the contrasting effect. In 1991, as a young curator at Colonial Williamsburg, I had advocated for the acquisition of the Staffordshire teapot, emphasizing to a roomful of colleagues that such a refined object would never have been used here in colonial America, but reserved for elite British households. Fast forward 15 years. Research in Charleston, South Carolina led me to Drayton Hall, one of America's finest 18th century houses, the seat of a wealthy family and a rice-planting empire. As my colleagues and I moved through the on-site storage rooms, we were astonished by the quality of the 18th century ceramics that had been recovered in archaeological excavations. In particular, we saw wonderful examples of Chinese export porcelain, previously unseen in any American home, and then it happened. As we pulled open another storage tray, there was my Staffordshire teapot staring me in the face. An astonishing discovery, to say the least, and I was happy to realize how wrong I had been all those years ago. Drayton Hall's curator, Sarah Stroud, is shown here admiring an antique example, which I helped acquire for their collections. Suffice it to say, Drayton Hall became a focal point of my research interest in ceramics, and it promised to be the perfect laboratory for expanding our knowledge on many fronts, and it hasn't disappointed. But first, a little background. Charleston was originally founded by the English in 1670, and named Charlestown in honor of King Charles II. During the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the city became one of the principal ports in British North America, deeply tied to rice, indigo, and transatlantic commerce. The spelling of the city's name gradually evolved from Charlestown to Charleston, and by the late 18th century, Charleston had become one of the wealthiest and most cosmopolitan cities in North America, often described as the cultural capital of the South, with strong connections to London, the Caribbean, and the wider Atlantic world. The cultivation of rice, called Carolina gold, fueled the low country economy, yet it was one of the most labor-intensive agricultural systems in early America. As a result, thousands of enslaved men and women toiled in the southern heat to clear cypress swamps and to plant and harvest the crop. It was within this landscape that John Drayton built his magnificent home, just steps from the Ashley River, where he remained connected to Charleston's international worlds of commerce and scientific thought. John Drayton embraced the vision of 17th century architect Andrea Palladio, but the architectural books in his library provided more than designs for a building. Drayton applied principles of symmetry, proportion, and ornament that shaped both the classical house and the life within its walls. In effect, Drayton built a temple proclaiming family ambition and a deep connection to the ideals of the ancient world. The result was America's greatest Palladian house, an edifice of beauty, ritual, and the timeless spirit of Greece and Rome. Drayton Hall's visual message did not stop at its temple doors. The interior moldings, paneling, and plasterwork created an enchanted domain shaped by mythology. The house became a Palladian theater of domestic life, guided by the underlying symbolic presence of Apollo and Dionysius. Although the Draytons were pursuing immortality, Drayton Hall faced economic collapse after the Civil War. Preservation efforts were started in the early 20th century, but its true transformation began in 1974 when it was acquired by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Scholars, architectural historians, and archaeologists have been at work ever since. It was a cold winter's day when Drayton Hall's director, Carter Hudgens, addressed Colonial Williamsburg's annual Antiques Forum. I was in the audience at the time when Carter changed my life. In his lecture, Carter revealed an 1802 diary entry that opened a window into Charles Drayton's world, showing that, like his father, he moved intellectually in step with London's cultural elite. That entry read, "Our schooner sailed to Drayton Hall with seed rice, flour, and cotton, a grand forte piano, along with a Barberini vase." I was stunned to hear this last item. So we know what an 1802 pianoforte may have looked like, an early form of the modern grand piano. Its arrival at Drayton Hall was entirely in keeping with the creation of an American sanctuary devoted to the promise of the Greek and Roman experience. The schooner would have docked literally at Drayton Hall's back door, and while the arrival of an expensive piano is certainly noteworthy, the question remains, what was the Barberini vase? Is a term you don't encounter every day. In fact, the Barberini vase is one of the most influential decorative arts objects ever discovered. Created in the 1st century AD, the vase is a beautiful yet mysterious Roman cameo glass vessel. Today, it resides in the British Museum, where it is also known as the Portland vase. Roman cameo glass was the brilliant adaptation of Egyptian and Greek glass traditions, which demanded both technical skill and artistry. Made by fusing a layer of opaque white glass over a dark blue body, Roman craftsmen carefully carved away the outer layer to create these delicate white figures. Beginning in 1790, famed British potter Josiah Wedgwood produced black jasperware copies of the vase, which soon became one of the most coveted luxury objects in the English-speaking world. But the presence of one of Wedgwood's vases at Drayton Hall carried far deeper meaning than mere wealth or fashion. To understand that significance, let's explore the story behind Wedgwood's achievement. The vase was reportedly discovered in the late 16th century in a tomb believed to be associated with a Roman emperor. the vase came into the possession of the wealthy and powerful Barberini family, who were among Europe's most ambitious collectors of antiquities, and the vase has carried their name ever since. From the moment the Barberini vase emerged from antiquity, the meaning of its white relief figures became one of art history's greatest academic debates, one that has endured for centuries without resolution. The scene on the vase is most often interpreted as the marriage of Peleus and Thetis, the pairing of a mortal Greek king and a divine sea goddess, and the future parents of Achilles, the hero of the Trojan War. At its deepest level, the Barberini vase becomes a meditation on divine love, mortal fate, and heroic destiny. Even the base conveys a hidden message, with the figure of Paris, who symbolizes judgment, desire, and the choices that direct the course of history. The existence of the vase became known to the Western world in the early 18th century through the educational quest of wealthy British and European aristocrats known as the Grand Tour. Excitement for the Grand Tour was fueled by the archaeological discoveries of the lost cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. A mania for Greek and Etruscan vases took hold, as antiquarians became little more than elegant grave robbers, ransacking the tombs of celebrated individuals in search of prized specimens. Through the efforts of Sir William Hamilton, a British diplomat and cultural tastemaker, the collecting and study of these looted vases became an all-consuming pastime for London's pseudo-antiquarians. The publication of his collection in richly illustrated volumes provided essential material for gentlemen's study clubs, and that collection also became the foundation of the British Museum's classical vase holdings. The Barberini vase remained the most revered of all classical objects, with Rome serving as the cultural center of the Grand Tour. Paying homage to this masterpiece at the Palazzo Barberini became a defining experience for the British cognoscenti. Around 1770, Scottish art dealer James Byers, who resides in Rome, acquires the vase from the Barberini family. Byers was at the forefront of the emerging neoclassical style and would one day find himself the subject of one of Wedgwood's famed Jasperware portrait plaques. Sir William Hamilton acquires the vase from James Byers, and in 1784 he sold it to Margaret Cavendish Bentinck, Duchess of Portland, whose vast collections rank among the greatest assemblages of antiquities in 18th century Britain. With this acquisition, the Barberini vase becomes known as the Portland vase. Unfortunately, the Duchess dies just a few years later. Her brother, the third Duke of Portland, determined to retain the masterpiece in the family, purchases the vase at the estate auction for over £1,000, an exceptional sum for the day. We turn to the great English potter Josiah Wedgwood, who named his Staffordshire factory Etruria, invoking the ancient homeland of the Etruscans, and there he developed innovative materials and techniques to satisfy the booming neoclassical market for vases. Wedgwood had developed an interest in the replication of the Barberini vase, and in 1786 the Duke of Portland loaned the vase to him for study. I have created this imagined portrait to illustrate what that historic moment may have looked like. But Wedgwood's enthusiasm for attempting such a feat soon turned to self-doubt. He writes, "Now that I can indulge myself with the full and repeated examinations of the original work itself, my crest is much fallen." After his initial misgivings about his own technological capabilities to capture the genius of Roman glassblowers, the project soon became both an artistic obsession and an industrial crusade. Wedgwood undertook thousands of trials over a 3-year period, experimenting with numerous Jasperware formula and firing techniques. Most problematic were the unsuccessful attempts to simulate the translucency of the glass original, and surviving trial pieces reveal cracked bodies, blurred reliefs, warped forms, and firing flaws. Rather than hiding these failures, the surviving examples document Wedgwood's remarkable journey, as each imperfect trial brought him closer to what he ultimately called "my great work." He finally declares success in 1790 and announces his perfected copies for sale to the public. Wedgwood initially offered his vases to leading aristocratic and royal figures, and the literary and scientific elite of British society. Notably, it was Erasmus Darwin who received the first perfect copy. After Josiah's death in 1795, the available Portland vases were sent to the company's London showroom, where Charles Drayton may have acquired his copy. Let us return now to Drayton Hall in the year 1802 and continue to explore the Barberini vase and its connection to Charles Drayton and his mythical vision. On one of our research trips to Drayton Hall, my partner, Michelle Erickson, insisted we bring along a Wedgwood Portland vase. Of course, not everyone has a spare Portland vase to take on a road trip, but I happened to have a blue version in my office at the time. Michelle's brilliant suggestion consequently produced a stunning visual portrait with Drayton Hall as backdrop. We toyed with the idea that if indeed Charles Drayton had such a vase, where would he have displayed it? We considered the many mantels associated with lavish chimney pieces. However, all of the mantels were quite narrow and would barely support a tea bowl, much less a sizable vase. The only room that had a mantel deep enough to hold a vase was in the Great Hall, the grand entrance room to the house. At first glance, though, we thought the carved picture frame molding above the mantel would interfere with the placement of the vase. It was at this surreal moment that Carter pointed to a cutout in the molding, so something like the Portland vase would fit perfectly. And as he placed the vase in the recess, it was as though a real-life fairy tale was unfolding before us, like Cinderella's glass slipper finding its rightful owner, or King Arthur drawing Excalibur from the stone. And as our version of the Barberini vase took its place on the mantel, we could sense the presence of the ghostly figures of former inhabitants, laughing, making music, dancing, falling in love, and mourning the dead. Questions remain, though. For example, how do we know Drayton's Barberini vase was a Wedgwood copy? The short answer is that we don't. Alternatives included an 18th century plaster cast of the original glass vase and a stoneware version produced by James Neal & Co. of Staffordshire around 1790. Both were far less expensive, and both lacked the prestige of Wedgwood's Portland vase. An associate suggested that Drayton's use of the term Barberini rather than Portland may indicate it was not a Wedgwood example. Both terms, however, seem to have been used interchangeably, and in Wedgwood's own record books of his kiln firings in the 1790s, we see the term Barberini used, although it is quite misspelled. One question that we could address: when was the picture frame molding modified, as the cut was not original to the mid-18th century construction of the house? We asked Dr. Susan Buck, a renowned architectural paint scientist, to analyze the layers of paint on the mantel and those in the face of the cut in the molding. Her findings suggest that the 1802 date on the diary entry could indeed correspond to the date of the architectural modifications. Later, I was able to acquire a 19th century black version of a Portland vase for Drayton Hall, and for all of us involved, it felt as our research had finally reached its fairy tale conclusion. We could end the story here, but we also must acknowledge that the Draytons' immense wealth was built upon the labor of enslaved people. And ironically, while perfecting the Portland vase, Josiah Wedgwood also created the abolitionist medallion, "Am I not a man and a brother?" linking the beauty of antiquity with the rejection of slavery, a profound contradiction in the Drayton Hall story. I believe we can feel confident that Charles Drayton's acquisition of a Barberini vase was much more than a passing curiosity. It expressed his aspirations of an imagined world for himself and his family. Drayton Hall was not sheer imitation. It transformed myth into lived experience, using design to frame the rituals of life, love, and death. Their classical themes not only offered an earthly vision of paradise, but also the real hope of obtaining entry to the Elysian fields. The presence of a Barberini vase at Drayton Hall united the greatest Palladian house in America with one of antiquity's most celebrated works of art. The vase was a signpost for how the ideals of Greek and Roman mythology could shape architecture, taste, and life itself within the larger Anglo-American vision. Thank you for watching today. While we may have solved one mystery, the whereabouts of the Drayton Barberini vase remains unknown. Yet another mystery waiting to be addressed. For further information about the ongoing research at Drayton Hall, please see their website. Thank you for sharing in these ceramic stories. They speak not only of the past, but also of the present, and perhaps even of the people we hope to be. I look forward to seeing you next time.